Hi everyone, my name is Meshak Masibo and welcome to the third episode of the Data Protectors Podcast. The goal of this podcast series is to offer guidance to small and medium-sized businesses and organizations on how to comply with Kenyan data protection law. Today, we're coming to you with an exciting episode that we've been developing to help our audience to understand the next steps after registration and the overall cost of compliance. But before that, let's have a look at the partners behind this podcast. Have you heard about the African Union European Union Digital for Development Hub? In a nutshell, it is a project that aims to increase cooperation in the digital field between Europe and Africa. And it is implemented by 8 organizations, including GIZ, the German Development Agency. Did you know that our Data Protection Act in Kenya was inspired by the European one, which is called the GDPR? Therefore, data protection is an exciting field for Africa and Europe to collaborate on, which is how this podcast came to life. We will share more information about the AU-EU D4D Hub project and the partners as we go along. But let's start hearing from our guests. For this episode, I'm excited to introduce our guest moderator, Susan, and our 2 speakers, Kariuki and Cynthia Chepkemoi. They'll serve as our guides to this episode.
Welcome to the show. My name is Susan Wajiku. I'm the moderator for this session. I work as the technical advisor at the Digital Transformation Center for Digital Skills and Entrepreneurship. In this episode, we will be talking about the cost of compliance for small and medium businesses and organizations. As a small business and organization with a small budget, you might get worried or even intimidated by the different requirements for becoming compliant. And you may even think that these are too expensive and especially maybe tailored just for large organizations with more resources. In addition to cash expenses, the time and the focus of founders and management of a small business, it takes a lot of time and you do not want to waste your energy, say, on this. So if we're being honest, maybe the next business deal or, figuring where your next money is coming for your runway would be better use of your time than trying to register with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. But this is the good news. You do not have to cost an arm and a leg. You do not have to break the bank to comply with the Data Protection Act of 2019. In fact, it might even give your business a competitive advantage in the future if you're compliant with data protection laws. This episode will give you some clues on how to make this happen. To help us break down this topic, we have the speakers Cynthia Chepkemoi and Kariuki. Both speakers have an enormous experience helping business owners and organization managers like you to be compliant with the data protection law in a cost-effective way, and this is why we are here today. Could you please introduce yourselves? Catherine?
Good day, everyone. My name is Kariuki. I am a practicing TMT lawyer and have done so for the last 12 years. I'm glad to be here today.
How about you, Cynthia?
Good day, everyone. My name is Cynthia Chepkemoi, and I'm a data protection officer with a background in law, and I'm glad to be here today and share the little knowledge you have.
Thank you so much. In the last episode, we took a closer look at what it takes to be compliant with the Data Protection Act in Kenya, and even zeroed in on the importance of registration as a data controller and processor, which is the first step in the compliance journey. You can listen to our previous episode by looking for it on the D4D Access website, which is www.d4daccess.eu. Let's start with you, Cynthia. After registration, as the first step to become compliant, what are the necessary subsequent steps for an organization to take to comply with the Data Protection Act?
Well, thank you, Susan, for that question. And normally, after registration, I believe that people tend to imagine that they are compliant fully, but then that's just the first stage of compliance. So it means that after you're registered, either as a data controller or a data processor, then the next stage would be to come up with a policy. And what does this policy development process involve? One, it's data mapping process because it enables an institution to understand its processing activities and data flows from data collection to data retention or disposal, and also enable institutions to understand their sources of data, whether it is direct or indirect. Another process that an institution will engage in developing their policy will be having a data inventory, which is a vital process that aids in identifying the data owners and the responsibility over the data. For example, we have human resource departments, we have procurement, we have security, which is physical security, and most of the time we realize that most institutions actually outsource security services. Well, we also have IT and finance. So at one point or another, you'll find that these different departments actually process different kinds of data. So then we have to apportion responsibility to each and every department within an institution, and this will be actually actualized by having a data inventory. Well, with the data inventory, then we, of course, narrow down to drafting a policy. And in our policy, of course, we have the scope of the policy, the responsibilities of the actors. We have to outline the principles, the rights of the data subjects. Actually, how do you optimize the data subject access request? Those are some of the clauses that will appear in the policy, and of course the practical and implementation aspect will come in later after you've developed the policy, rolled out, and all that. Another policy that will come into play will be the privacy risk assessment and management framework, which is really important during data protection impact assessments. So with the risk assessment and management framework, you get to understand what are the risks that the data we have as an institution pose to our institution. And the other aspect is what are the impacts of these, what is the likelihood of maybe a data breach or any loss to this data in case of a data breach. And with that, we are able to come up with a risk profile and what nature of risks are acceptable to a business. So the policy is a very important document in an institution. And I think it will be also good that I mentioned that I think we tend to actually, practitioners or let's say people who are currently in the role of data protection officers tend to confuse between a data protection policy and a data privacy data privacy policy statement or notice. So maybe just to give a brief overview, the statement, or rather the privacy notice, is what appears on our website. And this is where, when, let's say, I land on a certain website for a certain company, then the first thing I should see is a privacy notice, and they will let me know that we process your data, this is what we use your data for, this is on the lawful basis, and this is how we store it. And then when we talk of policy, the privacy policy, it is an internal document, it's more inward facing, and actually lays out the procedures on how an institution conducts different activities within in connection to processing of personal data. We also have the data retention policy, which is in a way interlinked to the data protection policy. And I think as we go on, we will get there, but so far so good. After registration, then we have to have a privacy policy, and it's a very important document because it speaks to the board, and it also lays out the role of the board, the role of different departments in an entity, and as well their responsibilities in relation to the data they process, and as the data owners or stewards as well. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Cynthia. So I'll turn to you, Catherine. Could you help us break down these concepts in a much more simpler way? What is the privacy policy?
Thank you for that, Susan. So essentially, following from what Cynthia has covered, she's touched on the issue of privacy policy and privacy notice, and pointed out the fact that a privacy policy is inward facing, while a privacy notice is what you would essentially find, the statement that you would find an organization gives on how they process personal information, and you'll find like on their website or their platforms. So to describe the two, because sometimes it's used interchangeably, you will go to, say, someone's website and find what they've provided as a privacy policy. So I would like us to match the two and essentially look at the principle of what both these documents provide. So essentially, I would say it is a statement or a document that a company or an organization releases to explain, say, how they handle and safeguard personal information of their users and customers. So the document or the statement itself will ideally cover important details such as the type of data collected, how it is utilized, who has access to it, and the security measures in place. And that is why we've for instance, lately been seeing a lot of activity on people discussing on the inadequacy of privacy policies or privacy notices that organizations have put out in place. And also regulators looking at keenly at privacy policies that organizations have put out or privacy notices, and looking at them with a keen eye to just see whether they had covered the basics that are required. So that said, I would say the key objective of a privacy policy or a privacy notice is really to provide the users with information about how their personal information is managed, as well as to establish transparency and really build the trust between the organization itself and the users. You'll find that regulators require organizations to have privacy policies and to put out privacy notices to just ensure that individuals' personal data is handled responsibly and in compliance with applicable laws and regulations.
All right. That was very insightful. I'll turn back to you, Cynthia. Could you help us break down very briefly a data retention policy?
So a data retention policy is a document, and I said in one way or another, it's interlinked to the privacy policy, and of course, it stipulates the periods in which how long can an institution hold personal data, and because we have different classes of data as classified depending on the institution, whether a hospital, whether a bank, or whether a school, like. Of course, when you go to a hospital, you'll find that they have our health data and, of course, diagnostic reports of our health situation and all that. So it needs to actually, every institution that processes personal data is mandated by the Data Protection Act to have a data retention policy, because when you look at the aspect of processing, it talks of collecting, transferring data, and storage. So in terms of storage, and I believe many institutions are facing challenges on in storage of personal data. So for how long should an institution hold data? And one, we have to consider, is there a legal basis that we use to rely on the retention period that you are going to actually have already a statutory requirement, right? Some of the laws that we interact with provide actually for limitation of time on storage of certain classes of data. Also, when coming up with a data retention policy, then there are a number of key general principles that must be adopted when considering record retention and protection policy. And they include, for instance, records must be held in compliance with all applicable legal or regulatory and contractual requirements. And secondly, the other principle would be that it must not be held for any longer than required, because we are now seeing institutions moving to storage of data in the cloud, because it's really difficult to retain data in hard copy. And it means an institution will be required to, let's say, for instance, go rent out, go down just for storage of that data. Then it becomes a challenge in storage. So then the next principle, we talk to protection of records in terms of their confidentiality, integrity, availability. And this must be in accordance with the classification of security, whether it is public, private, confidential, it's a secret, it's intellectual property, and all that. As well, we have the fourth principle would be the records must be remained retrievable in line with business requirements at all times. And remember, when I speak of retrievable, we have data subject access rights, as Catherine has mentioned earlier. Like all our customers or clients in an institution have a right to access data. This is a right that they have been granted under the Data Protection Act. So if I walk into an institution today and I want to access my data, then it means in whichever form you store it, then I have a right to access, and you should make it as an institution an objective that whichever way you store this data, it should be a procedure that it will be easy to retrieve, you know. And as much as the Act talks about anonymization, serialization, and pseudonymization, then if it becomes a challenge, or even encryption, sometimes institutions encrypt data, and when data subject will really wish to access their data, it becomes a challenge because maybe they have lost the decryption key and all that. Then the fifth principle I'll talk about is records. Where appropriate, the records containing personal data must be must be subject as soon as possible to techniques that prevent the identification of living individuals, like anonymization and pseudonymization. So it means an institution should retain, actually have a data retention schedule that it's normally presented in an Excel kind of sheet or format, and it lists the category of personal data, the description of that data, the retention period, and the timeline. Some would be like 2 years, depending on the operations of the business. Yeah, others will go as much as 5 years, 7 years, and other institutions have data that they keep permanently based on the operations of that business as well. And finally, of course, we have to state what are the allowable storage media that we can have this data stored in, because there are some laws when you look at, we have a document something management act in Kenya, and there are documents that are required to be in hard copy for purposes of, maybe you need to present a document in hard copy, like come with the original copy and all that. Then it means those copies need to be retained in hard copies. So what an institution can look at when coming up with data retention policy is the media selection. Is it in soft copy? Is it in the cloud? Do we do decryption and all that? Encryption, I mean. Then you also have choice of storage. And finally, we can look at how easy will it be to retrieve the data, review, and even actually destroy at the point of disposal of this data. Yeah.
All right. That was very insightful. And I think now at this point, I'm sure entrepreneurs are picking up their notebooks, because at this point, you really need to write things down. So Catherine, in your experience, what is important for organizations to have as data privacy policies and data retention policies?
Thank you for that, Susan. So it just as Cynthia has alluded to this, the importance of really having why it's important for an organization to have a data privacy policy and data retention policy. So obviously the first aspect is regulatory compliance. Yes, you get to tick that box, and apart from that, there are also benefits to the business itself. So to start with, you have a common reference point when you have a policy, because policies end up being guidelines or for both external facing and internal facing. Everybody has the same reference point. Say, for instance, if a policy covers this is how we handle data in our organization, that means that all employees are aware that when it comes to handling data, this is how it's handled within our organization X. And external users or like consumers are also aware. So there's that common reference point. Apart from that, I would say breaking down, looking at, for instance, a data retention policy, it will definitely, having one means that the organization has to address itself and determine how long they would like to keep data and when to dispose of it. Obviously, there are many considerations that will go into this. For instance, what the law requires, what are the principles that we have to observe, like the minimization principle. This will also help an organization, say, think about, and Cynthia has alluded to this, for instance, if we say that our data retention policy is we keep customers' data for 10 years, it also helps them address instances where regulatory requirements would get them to, say, store this data for longer. For instance, like for tax purposes, where you'll find there are specific requirements or a number of years that you're required to have data related to tax. There's also employment purposes. So having a data retention policy will help you wrap your head around that for an organization and be able to meet the regulatory requirements as well as the business needs, and also be able to assess the potential risks associated with data retention and disposal. On the other hand, I'd say having a data privacy policy really means that you've outlined clearly, without doubt, how personal data is collected, processed, stored, and shared. You would end up as an organization, once you have a privacy policy, it means that you've specified how you handle data, including consent for data protection, securing data, data management for individuals. And this is obviously important for maintaining the trust of customers and stakeholders, and for complying with privacy laws and regulations, and also competitive advantage, because in this day and age, we've seen because of consumer protection issues, how you can get a competitive advantage just demonstrating that you're adhering to or observing privacy concerns and data protection concerns.
All right. I'm thinking at this point that because I've heard a lot of touch points on protection of personal data. Cynthia, could you please tell us what is an information security policy and how even SMEs can use to protect personal data?
So when you look at an information security policy, this is a document that actually works closely with the privacy policy, because in my experience and practice, I realized that when you talk of data security, data privacy, then we refer to the information security, because this takes us to the technical angle of security and not just the policy and documentation. So the policy actually applies to all users of information assets. It could be from your watchman at the gate, from the administrator at the office. The cleaner will pick a paper from the trash and they realize, okay, this paper has sensitive information. So when we hear the term information security, actually it defines the total environment, and it includes, but it's not also limited to, all documentation, physical and logical controls, personnel, hardware. For instance, we have desktops, network devices and wireless devices, software and information. So I like taking a PPT approach. This is what we call the people, process and technology, because at the end of the day, it's the people who deal with technology. And I believe that people are the most important in this process. So while having this information security policy, it ensures that we achieve the information security principles, which are, there are three major information security principles that are well known, like the confidentiality principle, integrity principle, and the availability principle. So through this policy, we realize that it's important that the users also read and understand and comply with information security policies, standards, and procedures. And for instance, when you look at, let's say, it's more of an ICT policy as well. An example would be, within the policy, we'll have something to do with password policy. So how do we protect personal data? And I think what really makes information security a very important policy document to privacy practitioners, it's because this is the policy that actually explains to us that we have this kind of risks in the digital space, that is in the cyberspace. And of course, this is where we keep most of our information. And most of the information we have are in cloud, or we have them in hard drives. And what are the risks to this, or threats to this information? It could be cyber attack, let's say a ransomware, maybe just keyloggers and all those types of cyber attacks. So through an information security policy, it lays down actually the risks to information and infrastructure, because they come from different sources. It could be users, like us, as we interact with our devices each and every day. It could be vendors. And there's one thing I always keep saying, that as an institution, we cannot do everything in-house. At some point, we have to outsource service providers or services. So in the process of outsourcing, I believe nobody wants to outsource risks. So we are just outsourcing the service. So how do you take your vendors through your due diligence requirements, that as we onboard you as a service provider, you need to be compliant with the data protection policy, you need to be registered. And I think this is where the data processors come in. And of course, we need to take them through that phase, that for you to qualify to the next stage of procurement as a vendor, you need to meet this requirement. You need to be registered with the data protection officer in Kenya. That is where we have a local service provider. But then for international service providers, the best we can do is to sign data retention agreement, data processing agreements. Yeah. So the risks are diverse. They could be virus, they could be worms. And in the information security policy, this is also where we tend to interact with the business continuity and disaster recovery plans, because when you're experiencing...
Thank you, Cynthia, for that.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome. Yeah.
I'll move on to Catherine. And how can small and medium enterprises overcome the hurdle of expenses when doing basic compliance, like drafting a privacy policy or getting data protection officers, who we call DPOs?
Oh, that's a good question, Susan, because we get that question a lot where people say, I mean, there's this new act, there are all these requirements that are required, that are needed of us as an organization, but we don't have the resources or the budgets to handle that at the moment. And what we always tell them is compliance, first of all, is not a one size fits all. And compliance can also be phased out. You start from somewhere, and as long as you plan well, there's a way that you can get there. So when it comes to privacy policy or the issue of getting a DPO, indeed it's possible to get to become compliant without incurring significant expenses. For instance, you can use a free online privacy policy generator, and there are many free online privacy generators available out there. The only caution would be that always make sure that you review it and customize the policy to ensure that it meets the specific needs of your company and complies with the relevant laws, because the one thing that I'd like to underline here is compliance is not a one size fits all. So the privacy policy that would work for organization X would not necessarily work for organization Y. So you have to customize. The other thing is you can consult a legal professional. For instance, if you find that you require a more comprehensive privacy policy or have specific legal concerns, that would also be a good idea. And the interesting thing is there are many legal professionals who offer fixed fee services or templates that can help you create your privacy policy that is tailored to your needs. You can also use a privacy policy template. There are many templates out there that, as I said, you can customize to fit your company. You can also
Catherine,
check
could you
with your
tell
industry.
us, could you tell us some of them, some of the customizable templates that just, so that the audience can also just check to see who they are?
Okay, so there are many out there. Like if you Google, there are many out there that are not, even if they're not necessarily free, they are quite affordable, and you will pay a small fee and then be able to customize for your organization, and you will find that it is such an inexpensive venture. I know that there are also many privacy professionals in Kenya who have put out, and you'll find a website as soon you'll find on their website, and they also provide templates that you can easily customize in quite an inexpensive way. Then the other thing that I've seen happen, a lot of activity in Kenya, is industry associations are now also getting templates available for their members, where they provide either free or low-cost privacy policy templates that are tailored. The other thing is, if you use these options, I would think if you use, you can also have the organizations with legal departments. So I almost left that out. You can also have your legal officer be able to draft a template for you and draft a privacy policy for your organization. On the issue of getting a DPO, I know many organizations have been struggling with this, that we don't have the capacity to bring on board another resource, an independent resource as a DPO. But there are many options out there. For instance, if your organization is for instance, you can appoint an existing employee. The Data Protection Act allows for that, as long as they can demonstrate independence. So you can have an employee who already has an internal role, like we've seen where a legal, officer also doubles up as a DPO, or someone in the IT department also gets an additional role as a DPO, as long as you retain the test of independence. You can also outsource the DPO role.
Yeah, that sounds really good, Catherine. I think I'll open to, thank you so much to Cynthia and Catherine for engaging us on this conversation. Do you have any final thoughts? I'll start with you, Cynthia.
Oh, well, so as Catherine has actually stated, privacy compliance is a journey. It's not an event, and it can even take an institution 2 years 3 years to be fully compliant, because there are different phases to compliance, starting with the registration, development of the policies. Then, of course, there's an implementation aspect, which is really can be a headache. So I think we should really appreciate the fact that privacy policy being a new law, being a new regulations, then we are all in it to actually understand the processes that comes along with implementation of the policies. And one other thing is privacy and being in the role of a DPO takes a collaborative approach, because you touch on each and every department in an institution. So you cannot be an one woman or 1 man's army. It has to be collaborative, and working in silos doesn't work for this kind of law that is the Data Protection Act. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now back to you, Catherine, on your final thoughts.
Mine probably just to add to what Cynthia has said, exactly that compliance is not a one size fits all, and it is a journey. And therefore, you as an organization, you need to sit and audit, assess your unique data processing activities, your risk profile, and your business objectives to determine what specific measures you need to take in the next step. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we've come to the end of our show. Thank you for listening to our dear speakers and our wonderful moderator. To stay updated on data protection laws and concerns in Kenya, be sure to follow D4D Access throughout the coming weeks. Thank you so much to, again, our moderator, our 2 speakers, for taking the time to just teach us a bit more on these very important concepts. So bits about the podcast. The Data Protectors Podcast is a podcast produced in collaboration between GIZ Kenya and KICTANET as part of the AU-EU D4D Hub project. Follow the AU-EU D4D Hub on social media. You can find us on Twitter at D4D Hub_AU-EU. You can also contact us there for questions or comments. And if you're listening to us on Anchor, you can leave a voice message. Don't forget that all the episodes on this series are available on D4D Access. D4D Access is an online platform powered by the AU-EU D4D Hub, which aims to promote exchanges of knowledge and expertise between African and European digital stakeholders. Feel free to visit their website at www.d4daccess.eu. Thank you so much for listening, and see you on the next episode.